Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition and we turn now to poem 435, Much Madness is Divinest Sense. Now, this without question is one of the most anthologized of all of Emily's poems. I myself have given a lecture elsewhere already on this set of lines. Without question, if you're going to understand Emily, this is a poem that you have to understand. We are in many ways back to Emily and her paradoxes. She will even use the word discerning, although what's fascinating is that the only time in all of Emily's poetry in the Johnson edition that the word discerning gets used, it is in this poem. Of course, the idea of discerning will resurrect the whole question of what? Perspicacity, that word we've used in our study of Plato and the Republic, and you'll remember book 7 of Republic, the cave allegory. Perspicacity, insight, understanding. A discerning eye is an eye that is capable of what? Parsing, to understand what matters and what doesn't matter. Of course, no question, this is one of the great poems of Emily as iconoclast. Those of us who have come out of the psychology background love Emily's poetry because she is able to resurrect so many powerful questions about sanity, of course, madness or insanity, and the like. And in many ways, we're back to poem 410. You guys remember when we did 410? The first day's night had come, and grateful that a thing so terrible had been endured, I told my soul to sing. She said her strings were snapped, her bow to atoms blown, and so to mend her gave me work until another morn. And then a day as huge as yesterday's in pairs unrolled its horror in my face until it blocked my eyes. My brain begun to laugh. I mumbled like a fool, and though 'tis years ago that date, my brain keeps giggling still. And something's odd within. That person that I was and this one do not feel the same. Could it be madness? This? Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments. I'm hopeful that you have already read the preceding 434 poems. We just finished with 434 to Love the Year by Year. And if you've already done this reading to this point with us, then this is a poem that, as we've said already, will have echoes from previous poems like 410 that we've already studied. Now, in many ways, Emily is tapping into a very ancient idea that there seems to be some kind of connection between those who are sages or poets or prophets and possible levels of madness or insanity. Some have seen this as an angry poem. Some have seen this as a poem of hurt feelings, Emily the outsider looking at the majority that she will never be a part of. One scholar has called this an angry poem under strict poetic control, and I think that is a terrific way to think about this poem. All of these sounds, especially we'll point out before we get started, the S sounds, the M sounds, the D sounds. She'll say it this way. Much madness is divinest sense to a discerning eye. Much sense, the starkest madness. 'Tis the majority in this as all prevail. Assent, and you're sane. Demure, you're straightway dangerous and handled with a chain. Now, of course, the imagery here is remarkable. Notice that she begins with the word madness. Now, she's used this word a number of different times when we studied in 410. We played the game. We'll go ahead and look at a couple of the poems that are coming where madness is central. 1284. She says it this way. Had we our senses, and perhaps 'tis well they're not at home, so intimate with madness, he's liable with them. Had we the eyes within our head, how well that we are blind, we could not look upon the earth so utterly unmoved. When we get to poem 1323, she'll say it this way. I never hear that one is dead without the chance of life, afresh annihilating me, that mightiest belief, too mighty for the daily mind that, tilling its abyss, had madness, had it once or twice the yawning consciousness. Beliefs are bandaged like the tongue when terror were it told. in any tone consummate would strike us instant dead. I do not know the man so bold he dare in lonely place that awful stranger consciousness deliberately face. When we get to poem 1333, she'll say it this way about madness. A little madness in the spring is wholesome even for the king, but God be with the clown who ponders this tremendous scene, this whole experiment of green, as if it were his own. And then finally, when we get to poem 1436, she'll say it this way. Then heaven more remote, for heaven is the root, but these the flitted seed, where flown indeed than ones that never were, or those that hide and are. What madness by their side, a vision to provide of future days they cannot praise. My soul to find them come, they cannot call, they're dumb, nor prove, nor woo, but that they have abode is absolute as God, an instant too. Notice that Emily doesn't say all madness is divinest sense. She says much madness is divinest sense. And so already she's hedging her bets a little bit. And of course the word madness is a controversial word. At the very beginning, notice she will say that in fact it is often madness which is reason. And then of course reason which is madness. By the way, notice the use of the dashes in this poem. Every line but one in the layout in the Johnson edition will have its dash. And of course we will see the dash of the third line twice, yes. Much madness is divinest sense, notice capitalized sense, to a discerning eye. Again, the only time the word discerning ever gets used is here and now. And notice it's the word I, and notice that it's capitalized. What is she saying? Well, she's following Swift in Gulliver's Travels. How much our understanding of the world is about our perspective, yes? So as we've often done to kind of make the point of this in room 303, we can ask all the students to lie down on the floor and simply shut their eyes for a few seconds and then open them. And remind them, you are looking at the same classroom that you have sat in for many, many hours, but notice how different it looks from a different perspective. Certainly the argument is here. Madness can actually be sense if you have the capacity to look accordingly with a discerning eye. And then she'll come back, as we've seen her do this so often, to repeat much sense, the starkest madness. In other words, it's all about perspective. And then she'll say it. 'Tis the majority. And of course, majority will take us to poem 303. You guys will remember this one. Let's enjoy it one more time. I mean, I know we've already annotated it pretty closely, but let's enjoy it nonetheless. The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door to her divine majority. And again, notice the use of the word divine in this poem, divinest senses in the first line of the poem we're studying. The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door to her divine majority, present no more, unmoved. She notes the chariots pausing at her low gate, unmoved an emperor be kneeling upon her mat. I've known her from an ample nation, choose one, then close the valves of her attention like stone. This idea that majorities have tremendous power. She says, in this, as all prevail. When we get to poem 772, by the way, it'll be all is the price of all. Assent with the majority, in other words, agree, and you're sane. Demur, as in disagree with the majority, you're straightway dangerous and handled with a chain. It is significant that she would use the language, the iconic language of slavery. She would as well reference the potentiality that in certain kinds of special places for the insane, they were in fact often chained or treated in really, really terrible ways. What is it that Emily is really arguing in this poem at 2a? Well, one scholar has pointed out that normality and deviancy are often socially defined, right? Or another scholar has said what appears to resemble one man may seem idealistic to another. That is to say, what looks normal, right, in every way, can actually be quite abnormal, depending upon perspective. In other words, the challenge is obviously to find one's understanding of how one will live one's life. And then not worrying about the majority. Of course, Emerson will call this self-reliance, yes, and Emily was acutely aware of the Emersonian view, to be great is to be misunderstood. You'll recall that line from that essay in Self-Reliance. At 2b, the sounds of this poem are remarkable, right? So sanity has the S sounds of sane, assent, sense. And madness has the M sounds and the D sounds of dangerous, demure, much madness. And then notice how these two sound groups will merge in divinest sense and starkest madness. In many ways, Emily is already gesturing towards the Declaration of Independence that we will see in poem 508. We'll enjoy that one. We'll even possibly come back to this poem when we get there. I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. And they can put it with my dolls, my childhood, and the spring of spools I've finished threading too. Baptized before without the choice, but this time consciously of grace, unto supremest name, called to my full. The crescent dropped, existence whole arc filled up with one small diadem. My second rank too small, the first crowning on my father's breast, a half unconscious queen, but this time adequate, erect, with will to choose or to reject, and I choose just a crown. Or when we get to poem 789, she'll say it this way: on a columnar self, how ample to rely, in tumult or extremity, how good the certainty that lever cannot pry and wedge cannot divide, conviction that granting base, though none be on our side, suffice us for a crowd ourself, and rectitude in that assembly not far off from furthest spirit God. Reminds us, of course, of Henry David Thoreau, obviously a contemporary, in his Civil Disobedience, a majority of one. He will make the argument there. And obviously at 3a we could throw in not just Thoreau, but obviously Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance, as well. We've given full lectures on all the Emerson lectures, including, of course, Self-Reliance, as well as Thoreau's Walden and Civil Disobedience at learnstrong.net if you want to run those to ground. Finally, at 3b, what was a time in your life, to own a poem like this, what was a time when you felt dangerous and that they wanted to handle you with a chain because you stood up to the majority? I hope your study of Emily is challenging you. Thank you.